There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTuber, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. Oh no, it's a Saturday Reads. I took the day off yesterday. Decided to just put my feet up. Well, that's not quite true. The reason I decided to finish editing the video with Ronan Hession, which was a very long video. It was a delightful conversation, and I love editing, but oh my god, those long form chats, they take forever. And I'm not complaining, just that I wish I could be faster with editing, but I'm not. I will never change. And so that's what I did yesterday instead of doing a Friday read. So that just went up last night. Please check it out. It took me forever to get it ready to bring to you, and that's the only video I put up in the past week. So there's no formal kind of weekly highlights in review type of thing. What a fantastic reader, writer, and book buddy Ronan Hession is. So do check that out when you have time. So here I am with my new blouse that I threatened might arrive in the mail in time, and that was another reason why I thought, oh, I'm not going to just completely skip doing a weekly check-in. I'm just going to defer it until Saturday, and here it is. This is such a Sean blouse. Oh my god. I feel like I should have a glass of wine or even a martini, but it's, 6:45 a.m., so not even I would get started that early or continue that late into the night. Anyway, I did hesitate to do a weekly check-in because I have a lot of negative stuff. And the truth is that all of the writers that I didn't enjoy or bailed on this week were writers of color, as they say in America. 2 black women writers and 1 male Indian writer. And that makes me kind of uncomfortable. But I think in the grand scheme of things, people, if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know that I read a ton of fiction by writers who are not white because white people suck. And so inevitably, this kind of thing is going to happen. I'm not going to rant about any of these. There's one I'm going to have to maybe bite my tongue not to rant about, but this happens. So stay tuned. There's going to be some negative stuff at the beginning, and then if you stay long enough to hear what I've started this week, there'll be some really passionately positive stuff. So, or you can fast forward to that. I do put timestamps on my Friday reads because I read so widely and so many different kinds of books that I think it's only fair to you that you should be able to easily skip through it. So, skip away. I don't have much personal news. Things are going okay. I'm reading a whole bunch of good stuff, so that's my personal check-in. I'm reading a whole bunch of good stuff. And I have a new blouse, and I just impulse bought one yesterday on Instagram. Lindy's the only person I've shown it to. I showed her a picture just a few hours ago, and she approved, but it's really, it's either the Shauniest Sean blouse of all, or it's going to get me kicked out of BookTube when I show it to you. It'll probably take a month to arrive. If it arrives, I'm always nervous buying stuff like that from a... Anyway. Yeah, my personal news is I've had a good reading week, and I am just absolutely addicted to buying blouses. So, without further ado, let's get started. I have 2 bails to tell you about, and I finished 1 book. The first bail was this one, which was really disappointing. Teen Couple Have Fun Outdoors by Aravind Jayan. And I read half of this, and it was, it's a story. The premise is fascinating. It's about a young couple. I think they are still in high school when the original incident happens. They think they have found some privacy in a public park in Kerala State. Trivandrum, I believe, is the name of the city. And so they have sex outdoors. But somebody's secretly filming them. And then several years later, like they're in their 20s, when that video surfaces online and goes viral. So their parents find out and everybody finds out, and it's just this huge thing. So that sounds fascinating. Different generations and how they deal with or don't deal with this kind of such a modern scandal and evolving mores around sexuality. Oh my god, I was in there like a dirty shirt, but it was so boring. It was just I haven't read a mind-numbingly boring book. I haven't tried to read a mind-numbingly boring book like this, so I don't want to rant. But it's a debut novel. But there was no character work. None, really, none. And the characters didn't communicate to each other. So everybody went mute and sullen and banged doors and stuff, but nobody talked. And that's maybe realistic. But then give us some access to some of the characters' inner lives. There was nothing. I mean, the main character was the brother of the boyfriend, but he didn't have much of an inner life either. Yeah, I got to the 50% mark and it was just so frustrating that I gave up. There are probably readers out there, and there's a lot of them, you could find their reviews on Goodreads, that liked it or loved it and perhaps thought that mutedness and lack of interiority was the perfect way to tell this story, but for me it absolutely wasn't, and I couldn't bring myself to read another page. And also, very disappointingly, I have bailed on this novel by the Cameroonian novelist Léonora Miano, Twilight of Torment, Part 1, Melancholy. This was a buddy read with Roz, and I just couldn't get into this. As I said before, it is a four different first-person voices, all addressing their narration to a man who doesn't get his own chapter, but we get a perspective on this guy, this Cameroonian guy, from his mother, from his first wife, from his sort of girlfriend, and I'm not sure who. I think the fourth voice, I bailed in part 3, but the fourth voice was of his sister. That's not really second person, is it? When it's I and then I'm speaking to a you that is another character, that's not. I did some research on second person narration a few years ago. I had grand ambitions to make a video reading a bunch of those kinds of novels, and I still might someday, but I think my research suggested that kind of a narration is not considered second person narration. Anyway, whatever it is, it didn't work for me. I had trouble getting my footing in it. I did succeed with the first section, but the second section didn't work for me at all. The first wife, she was really woo-woo into spirituality and talked about it in a really kind of new agey way. The challenge that I appreciated from both of those 2 chapters, in fact, the 2.5 chapters that I read, they're not chapters, sections or whatever, was it's so Afrocentric. And that left me really struggling to get a footing. So that part I loved, and if that had been the only problem, that's not a problem. I loved that. But so much of it was so intellectual, and there was so little story in some of the sections, and really the writing wasn't that great, and for pages and pages, that my eyes kept glazing over, and so about halfway through the 3rd section, I gave up. And I loved Miano's earlier novel that was translated into English, Season of the Shadow. I have a full review, which I will link, and that was a historical novel that was more conventionally told, I guess, but was groundbreaking in its depiction of a certain area of Africa at the beginning of the slave trade and how it affected the people that were left behind. Just an incredible novel. This just didn't work for me at all. For people that are more into experimental fiction and don't care so much about character work, don't care so much about emotional connection with what you're reading, and the intellectual connection is enough for you, this is probably going to work for you. But I was really quite upset that I literally couldn't turn another page. I'd said enough, so that happened. The one book that I finished in the past week was quite early in the week. That was Kibogo by Scholastique Mukasonga, translated from the French by Mark Polizzotti. And I didn't like it. This was a buddy read with Heidi. I didn't hate it. I didn't like it. It left me absolutely cold. It was, again, no character work. And it was a narrative exploration of syncretism and the problematics of syncretism. It was Rwandan spirituality clashing with the evil Christian missionary bullshit spirituality in Rwanda. I was incredibly supportive of anything that showed how evil Christianity, and particularly missionary work, is always. But it just wasn't a story that came to life for me. I didn't ever get engaged with it. It was kind of Heidi. This was a buddy read with Heidi of My Reading Life, and she pointed out that it had kind of a folktale feel. Well, there you go. Folktales are ridiculous. There was nothing that gave any life to the reading experience, and I didn't bail, but I sure didn't enjoy it very much. I quite liked, if like is the word, Mukasonga's Cockroach or Cockroaches. Here's the cover gif, which is about the genocide, and I think quite an autobiographical story. But certainly that was a really emotionally compelling, devastating, challenging read. This one just left me completely cold. All right, so that's my negative stuff. I didn't rant. I ranted a little bit about the Indian guy, but I'm not sure that male Indian writers who live and write in India are marginalized, are they? But anyway, so I am dying to tell you some good stuff. So I have started two. I told you I was only going to be starting one, but sue me. I started The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. This is her second, I think it's her second short story collection. It's the second one I've read. Last year I read Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self. And Danielle Evans, in addition to being one of my favorite short story writers working today, also has the best titles ever. Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, and this one, The Office of Historical Corrections. I have only read the first story. I read it before I went to that movie I told you about, which I enjoyed, but it was kind of a crappy Canadian movie, but also really good acting, and the story was compelling, but Canadian movies are terrible. That's enough about that movie. But I went early and sat at a cafe, and I felt like I was in a big city. I was sitting in a cafe, and I read this story, and I needed a hug by the end. It was so beautiful, so weird, and emotionally devastating. The first story is called Happily Ever After, and it's about a young black woman, Lissa, and her mother gets terminally ill, and the part that just gutted me was the way that the adult daughter, gussied herself up to go to doctor's appointments with her mother in the hopes that by dressing to the nines, she could evade the systemic racism of medical treatment for black women, and that the doctor would actually treat her mother like the doctor would have treated a white woman. Oh my God. Just incredible. Danielle Evans is the bee's knees. And I have started reading another novel. If you don't know, I have a Patreon account. I haven't had a new patron for weeks and weeks and weeks. I got a whole bunch when I first launched, and I haven't had any for a long time, and I hesitate to spend too much time talking about Patreon on my main channel, but I would welcome some more support. So check out the show notes. But the top tier patrons, the Bibliophile Besties patron, which is the top tier, those patrons get, I read a novel or I read a book to them over Voxer or something, Facebook Messenger or Voxer, privately. It's not, nobody else can listen. It's only it's a dyadic experience. And so I have started reading to one of my patrons. I asked her if I could use her first name, and I thought she replied, but then I couldn't find her reply. So I'm not going to use her name yet, her first name, but I'm reading to her William Maxwell's novel, published in 1937, I believe. They Came Like Swallows. Yeah, 1937 is right. William Maxwell was the fiction editor, and I think not only the fiction editor, but certainly a really important personage at the New Yorker magazine for most of the 20th century. And this was an early novel. I think it might have been not his debut, second novel. Autobiographical novella. And it's set in Illinois at the end of World War I, and with the emergence of the flu epidemic. Oh my God, the writing, it's just the most gorgeous literary prose, and it's a child's, at least the first section. I think the point of view shifts after book one. I've just finished reading book one to my patron, and it's from the perspective of, I think he's about 9 years old boy, and who loves his mother, and he's got this rich inner fantasy life, and he's a little scared of his father, and he bullied to a certain extent, maybe nothing beyond the normal range of bullying by his older brother, and the whole family middle-class family. William Maxwell turns them into the most fascinating literary characters imaginable. And just, well, it's a delight to read aloud. The prose just rolls so trippingly off my tongue, and some of my favorite passages have been about his imagination. Because I don't often get along with child-centered stories, child-centered narrators, and this was just a joy. This was just amazing. He's got a thing about the fact that there's a grandfather clock in the house, and then another clock, a smaller, maybe electric clock, and he imagines them arguing because they're never quite in sync. And the way that those sentences, those passages are written, they just capture my imagination so much. And there's so much more to it. Oh my God. And I'm so mad because I Googled William Maxwell, and of course I was pretty familiar with the broad outlines of his life, but I Googled some to get a little bit more background on this novel, and I got a major spoiler, and there's no spoiler on the back cover. I didn't check Goodreads, but anyway, I didn't really like that. I often like to pretend that I don't care about spoilers, but actually, yeah, I do. I didn't really want to know that information about what's coming up in the next chapter or the next section of the novel. But, oh, this is a delight. So that's what I've read, or not read, or bailed on, or whatever. So it's been, and I've also been reading luxuriantly, without any rush, not rushing through anything, all the other more than 10 books that I'm reading, and I'm reading a bunch of amazing books. So I did feel weird about sharing so much negative stuff when I have lots of positive stuff in progress, and did start a couple that knocked my socks off. I'm only going to start one more, and I probably have no business adding one more to the list because I'm reading all my books at such a luxuriant pace that I'm not finishing anything very fast. But it's a buddy read starting with Heidi of My Reading Life, and I'm really excited about getting started. And that is a short story collection by the Indigenous writer who hails from what is now called Alberta, Chelsea Vowell. Buffalo is the New Buffalo. And I'm excited about it. I'm also nervous because apparently it's very experimental. And I've heard very mixed reviews of it. Lindy loved it. Oh my God, look at this. It just almost disappears into my blouse. And Mom gave me her copy. She didn't really like it. Didn't get very far into it, but she had this Van Gogh bookmark, which goes so well that you can barely even notice it. Book, and then it disappears into my blouse as well. That was well coordinated. This is a kind of it takes off from a slogan, a maxim within the Indigenous culture in Canada: education is the new buffalo. It's a metaphor that's used within Indigenous culture to express how important education is. And buffalo, of course, was the way the Plains people historically supported themselves until the white people killed all the buffalo. This is kind of like, it's speculative fiction, which makes me very nervous. And it imagines, what I understand is that it imagines the reemergence of buffalo in the present day, or perhaps even into the future, from a Métis perspective. That's all I know. I don't want to know any more. Heidi and I are starting out slow. There is about 15 or 20 pages of prefaces and introductions and stuff, and that's all we're going to read for our check-in on Monday, and then we'll read a story a week. Trepidatious, is that right? Is that the right word? Full of a little bit of trepidation going in, but also very stoked to give it a try. All right, so that is my Saturday Reads. Thank you for watching.